So today I want to take a look at another masterpiece of deception from Prager University. This video is entitled Capitalism or Socialism, Which One is More Democratic? It also happens to feature Dinesh D'Souza. If you're not familiar with Dinesh D'Souza and his perspectives, he's someone that doesn't believe that racism exists and has had very wild perspectives, such as the Democratic Party in 2016 being exactly like the Nazi Party. He tends to make these very conservative, bold claims that really have no basis in reality and do not hold up to scrutiny. With that said, let's take a look at the video.
Why is socialism so popular?
Well, the thing is I don't happen to believe that socialism's as popular as he's putting out there. I think that with the pandemic and with a lack of stimulus checks, I think socialist perspectives and ideas are starting to be talked about a little bit more, which is good from my perspective, even through me being an anarchist. I think the further left that we go, the better off we are. And it's easier to move a socialist into anarchy than it is to deal with a lot of other political perspectives out there. So that said, I don't know what he's doing there besides trying to appeal to a fear of a certain audience that socialism is on the rise and to try to get that kind of immediate reaction out of people.
Less than 10 years ago, you couldn't refer to socialism in a positive way and hope to have a career in American politics. Socialism was referred to as the S word. Now it is affirmed either explicitly or implicitly by just about everyone on the left.
That's not true,
And
but I wish it
amazingly,
was.
given socialism's record of failure, the socialists seem to be gaining ground.
Can we take a minute to appreciate how bad the infographics from Prager University are? You have this thing where they're trying to talk about capitalism versus socialism, yet you've got this grade for socialism as an F, with no basis in reality or no factors to take into account to apply that grade to. Capitalism doesn't have a grade, and we have this infographic where popularity is going to the right, and then socialism is being labeled, but there's no other axes being done. This is just Prager University being Prager U. None of this really means anything, and they're just showing it off to kind of create a visual that justifies the perspective being said in the video with nothing backing it, and certainly no sources to back it up.
Why? What makes socialism so attractive to so many? Socialism, according to its proponents, is more democratic and therefore more moral than capitalism.
True.
Leftist filmmaker Michael Moore explains it for us. Democratic socialism means everyone has a seat at the table and everybody gets a slice of the pie.
I find it a little odd that Michael Moore is the person that they're using to represent socialism. I feel like we could do a lot better than that, as especially a first representation. But sure, essentially what Moore is saying here is true. So I guess I'll go with that.
The famed socialist writer Irving Howe wrote something similar in his 1982 autobiography. We believe that the democracy in our political life should also be extended deeply into economic life.
True.
The basic idea here
Very
is that
good.
socialism is vindicated through its roots in popular consent. If a majority of people working through their elected representatives declare something to be a public entitlement, say free college or free health care, then they are justified in extracting resources from those who create wealth to pay for it.
So there was a lot wrong there, and I think it all needs to be addressed. First of all, under socialism, you would not have the kind of wealth that is being talked about here. So I'm going to start with that and then kind of work backwards. You'd have a situation where all of the workers would be working in a place and would have some sort of democratic control over their business. So instead of it being a boss using authoritarian power to dictate policy, you would have workers democratically choosing policy. And workers would be able to control their wages and would be able to extract a proper amount of value from what they put into their labor. So when you have these types of situations where a society would need something like public health care or public education, you'd be able to extract the resources as a taxation of a much larger group of people, and it would represent all of those democratic workers being able to put money into a tax pool that would allow for them to come together and make these public rights available. He used the word entitlement, which is, of course, a conservative buzzword to attack and criticize anything that is being offered that the left might consider a right. Another issue that's being conflated here is the idea that in a socialist economy or socialist government, that you'd have a situation where we'd still have Republican ideals of elected representatives. Basically, he's arguing that people vote for their representatives who would then try to steal the wealth. The fact is, we'd probably have to move towards some form of direct democracy in this situation. So everything here is basically a straw man and designed to attack the current system and try to defend the wealthy people from being taxed in order to provide rights and value to the rest of society. This is not criticizing socialism, it's criticizing taxation.
As Nathan Robinson argues in his book, Why You Should Be a Socialist, the moral imperative is to place the economy under the control of the people.
True.
Sounds good, at least superficially, until you dig a bit below the surface.
And here's where we twist, right?
What direct control do the people really have over any government institution?
So as an anarchist, this is something that I actually do ask, and it is a valid question, but he's using it in a very manipulative way. The truth is that the people very rarely, especially in a representative democracy like in the United States, they rarely do have any government control. You can theoretically vote for certain representatives, and oftentimes you're voting against the other party rather than for your particular person. This could be fixed with certain systems like ranked voting, but the only real change that one can make is by primarying your candidate or putting forward certain candidates on a local level that can actually make effective change. Generally speaking, we don't have as much of a voice in a representative democracy. I also would argue that under forms of socialism, there would still be that draw for power to, self-contain itself, and with the ability to use state violence against people, you'd create a situation where you'd end up kind of extracting the resources into a very small system, and you'd end up repeating the process. Again, that's me as an anarchist. But I also do believe that socialism is a much better position to be in than where we're currently at in the United States. So we need to kind of move in that direction. So, great question, but it's about to be used manipulatively, I'm sure.
What control do the British people have over the National Health Service? What control do Americans have over the Department of Motor Vehicles or the U.S. Post Office?
So here, this is what I mean that he's using it manipulatively. So the National Health Service in Britain, I can't really speak on because I don't have a lot of knowledge about how that particular system works, but I can say that their healthcare system is probably better than the US from what I have heard, and more people have access to healthcare. The DMV, if it exists in your state, is generally speaking a state institution and isn't tied to the federal government, so it really doesn't have the kind of same leverage. But at the end of the day, I don't understand what he's getting at with the DMV. And the post office is already a private institution that just happens to be government funded. So he's using very bizarre examples to try to attack and criticize things that some people have complained about and have issues with. Like, if the post office doesn't deliver your package on time, you might get angry at them. The DMV, generally speaking, is a very hard experience for people. So he's calling these out and conflating them with what socialism is. And this is not an accurate representation of socialism. Though I would argue that under socialism, both the DMV and the post office should be represented by the workers having democratic control of the institution and being able to explicitly state what the policies are and being able to make an equal share of the profits off of what the DMV might make as a state institution.
The answer, of course, is none. Given its practical impossibility, genuine popular control over government institutions is a mirage. Second,
general popular control over government decision-making is not this thing that can just be pushed aside as being impossible. There are ways to make it happen. We do live in a representative democracy, so that doesn't happen in the United States. But that doesn't mean it's impossible to create or design, especially with using technology and other factors. You could definitely create a system that's a lot more democratic.
What if 51% of Americans vote to confiscate the resources of a single person, say Bill Gates? Does that make it right?
Again, what he's talking about here is taxation, not really any sort of active position in socialism. I highly doubt that the best opportunities for socialism and the best arguments would be to redistribute wealth, but to create a system where equality of opportunity is formed that would, over time, diminish how much wealth a single person had. But I honestly believe that if you had to steal wealth from someone like Bill Gates as much as he had and redistribute some of it, while he could still live a really, really good life and his kids can still live really, really good lives, I don't think that'd be the worst thing in the world. But this feels more like a perspective of attacking taxation than socialism. And he's kind of strawmanning that position to defend the wealthy and rich.
Under an authoritarian socialist government, a single dictator seizes the fruits of your labor. Everyone is against that. Under democratic socialism, a majority does. The end result is the same. You've been robbed.
Who's this you that he's talking to? Who's been robbed? Because the majority of people who would be taxed effectively under a proto-socialist form of government in the initial stages would not be the general people, it would be the wealthy. So he's really speaking to the wealthy, and this is just further entrenching the fact that he is talking about taxation right now. He's not interested in socialism or anything. He's interested in maintaining power structures of wealth.
The fundamental problem with democratic socialism, however, is its assumption that in a free market system, the economy is not under the control of the people.
It's
This is
not.
exactly the opposite of how things work. Let me explain. Each of us are not only citizens, we are also consumers. These are overlapping categories. Every citizen is a consumer, and every consumer is also a citizen.
If every citizen is a consumer and every consumer is a citizen, why does the Venn diagram currently show them as two separate entities and not just one circle? Again, Prager University with its great infographics that make no sense. If citizens and consumers are both one-to-one, as he's describing, this should just be one circle. But I feel like that's going to violate whatever is supposed to be in the middle here.
Consumer, like the citizen, is a voter. As citizens, we vote once every 2 or 4 years. As consumers, we vote many times a day.
So here we go with the argument that somebody is able to vote with their dollar. The problem, of course, being that when one attempts to vote with their dollar, you are only able to vote as much as you have acquired wealth. So you're essentially prioritizing the wealthy position of voting with your money versus someone who's poorer off who can't necessarily do that. And it doesn't call into question the inequality that's inherent within capitalism and the system, and it's making it look like everyone has an equal voice when really they don't. Bill Gates, with his billions and billions of dollars, for example, since he brought Bill Gates up, has a much larger vote than someone who is, struggling to make ends meet. Therefore, it's not really democracy, but another form of that representation of authoritarianism, and is actually a good argument for socialism, because under socialism, you might have a greater idea of being able to vote with your dollars as more people have an equal opportunity across the board. You might actually create a situation where wealth inequality is actually diminished. So his argument's actually supporting socialism right now.
Citizen votes with a ballot, which costs him nothing except the inconvenience of going to the polls. The consumer votes with his money, which costs him a lot, all the time and effort he put in to earn that money. Only a fraction of citizens are eligible to vote at the ballot box, but every consumer votes in the marketplace, even felons, even children.
Even felons and children are able to vote with their dollars, except felons can't get jobs. Children often don't make their own money, they're working with their parents' money. So no, there's not really that much of an issue to talk about here. He's just using the situation to make it look like socialism bad and, capitalism good. But the truth also is when he said, what was it?
But every consumer votes in the
I
market
just want to go
all the
back one
time and
second.
effort.
All the time and effort, right? When he's talking about this perspective, all the time and effort that's put in. The fact is that the people who do the most work and put in the most energy and put in the most time are not necessarily the people who make the most money back. Landlords tend to do very little and make a lot of money. So again, it's this appeal to, speaking to the wealth and rich and the mythology of American capitalism. And again, these arguments, if you really want to be making them, should actually adhere to a socialist perspective, not a capitalist one.
He put in to earn that money. Consumer vote for political candidates, but they too vote with their money. Moreover, citizens participate in a system of representative democracy. Their views are filtered through the politicians who represent them. Consumers, by contrast, vote in a system of direct democracy. If you prefer an Audi to a Lexus or the Apple iPhone to the Samsung Galaxy,
because those are choices we all make every day, and they're the most important choices in our lives, not the day-to-day goings-ons of laws and, needs, or how a business functions and the ethics of that, and whether or not a river being polluted is a good idea or not in order to make a company money, or the needs of a society based on a much larger scope. No, we're talking about whether or not, you get an actual choice between an Audi and a Lexus. How many of you are actually making that decision on a day-to-day basis right now, especially with the way things are going in this economy? Not many, right? Like, this is speaking to a very specific privileged class of people who has lost touch with the rest of reality. And the idea that he's comparing a representative democracy versus the direct democracy of buying with your dollars, again, speaks to what I said before. Under socialism, you would want to move from a representative democracy probably to a more direct form of democracy. And even if you kept that representative democracy, it would still influence the situation a lot more by having democracy within the workplace, thus equalizing pay a little bit more across the board, which would make his argument about this perspective on buying things much more egalitarian rather than the very authoritarian position where people in a wealthy place can buy more than somebody who is poorer off. Most Americans are not choosing between an Audi and a Lexus right now. Most Americans are choosing between medication, food, and rent. And that's not a choice anybody should have to be in.
You don't have to elect some other guy to exercise these preferences. You do it directly yourself by paying for them.
It's all the
Here we see
illusion
the
of choice.
secret of how those billionaires like Jeff Bezos got so rich. We made them rich. The inequality that socialists complain about is the result of popular mandate.
Whenever you hear the word mandate, they are appealing to a type of position and perspective that states that somebody deserves to be there. You have divine rule, which was the mandate of heaven. You get these kind of perspectives in history where a mandate brings somebody in. So the argument essentially is that someone like Bezos or Bill Gates deserves to be in their position because they somehow worked harder than everybody else or did more or did something to earn it. But the fact of the matter is a lot of it is based on luck. Furthermore, this inequality is not simply because people voted with their dollars, but when you're given the choice simply between an Android phone and an iPhone, with no competition able to come in without it being crushed under the weight of these other two names, or you have a situation where 5 companies or 6 companies own entire industries, you're not really given the choice, but an illusion of choice. Because in order to secure a lot of these products, or to secure a way of life within the United States society, one must purchase certain products to thrive and survive. You only get a choice, for example, between 1 or 2 internet providers in your area. You only get a choice between a handful of cell phone brands. You only get a choice between, certain vehicles. You only get a choice between certain things in every single facet of your life. And even if you're buying between multiple brands of, say, food, at the end of the day, it's still owned by several companies. This is an illusion of choice being presented as if you have actual choice, and the billionaires, by being able to buy up smaller companies and being able to buy out other sources, end up having an oligarchic control, basically a rich, wealthy class of people controlling the majority of what exists. And therefore, it is not really your choice to do that, but rather a position where all of these products, which are necessities of life, must be maintained and centralized in the hands of a small few group of people, right? So it's not just because they made the best product, it's because we have no choice.
Want fewer billionaires? Stop buying their stuff.
That sounds so
Free
simple,
markets
but they
work
own
not
it
through
all.
greed or exploitation,
Yes, it
but by
is.
satisfying our wants. And the most successful
And cornering markets so we have no other choice.
entrepreneurs are those who anticipate our wants even before we have them. No one wrote Steve Jobs asking him to make a phone that took pictures, allowed people to text messages, and listen to music. He conceived it and built it before we knew we couldn't live without it.
The funniest part about that to me is that most of the technologies that make up an iPhone were not created by Jobs, first of all. And it wasn't even created all by Apple. A lot of it has a rich history of coming from a lot of different sources and places. That's first and foremost. Second of all, Jobs was against, from what I understand, the idea of the internet being on an iPhone. He just wanted an iPod that was able to make phone calls. So no, Jobs isn't this like superior, greater man who came up with all these ideas himself. He actively was part of an organization that overrid him on a few things to make this great product. And first of all, I think iPhones are terrible compared to Android. That's my own personal perspective, especially with a lot of the features they use to like close off their ability to interact with other devices. But at the end of the day, a lot of the technologies, including GPS and the internet, were developed through a lot of communal research and government research, and weren't even just the creation of, Jobs himself. So this is just this disingenuous piece to try to make Jobs look like a hero, like he knew exactly what people wanted. At the end of the day, he got lucky, just like everybody else.
Market economies involve a level of popular participation and democratic consent that politics can only envy. We don't need to extend democracy from the political to the economic sphere.
Yes, we do.
We already have it.
No, we don't.
And the moral grounding of free markets, just like that of our political system, is in the will of the people. In the latter case, a will expressed only on election day. In the former case, a will expressed deliberately, emphatically, constantly. We don't need socialism because we already have something more moral and more democratic. It's called capitalism. I'm Dinesh D'Souza for Prager University.
So with that, again, he reiterated the same points, and I'm just going to clarify and conclude on kind of criticizing that. And it is not democracy in capitalism. Anybody who recognizes the ability that someone with $1 million can vote much more with their money than someone who only has $100 can see that it's still an authoritarian system. What socialism is speaking to in this regard is that in a workplace, people will have some form of direct democracy, or at the very worst, a representative democracy, where they have more of a say and can make more money off of their share of labor. He's conflating this idea by trying to defend the wealthy and the people with status and their ability to control in an authoritarian way both the government and businesses without any regard for what people actually want or need. This type of democracy that he's describing is an illusion and is not really democracy. It's the illusion of choice, and it's the illusion of understanding that we really don't have a voice if we have less money to vote for than another person. At least when you vote in a representative democracy, one vote represents one vote in theory, especially within your state. Certainly not in the electoral college system, which again is another thing that I think should be abolished and moved away from, so that one vote really does mean one vote and not one vote within your state. So D'Souza is being disingenuous here. PragerU is yet again using little tools of deceit in order to manipulate the situation to make it look like one thing is something else when it's not. And what he's really concerned with here is whether or not wealthy people are being taxed, and whether or not the wealthy people can continue to exist in the way that they are, manipulating and controlling people. And especially in this economy where people don't want to give stimulus checks, this perspective reeks of just a disconnect from the reality of most Americans. With that said, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and bell for notifications. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my Discord in the description down below. We have an amazing community. We'd love to have you. And with that said, my name is Anarchist Tara, and I hope you enjoyed watching.